Well, welcome back, everyone, to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. Joining me today is my old buddy, Nick Hausman of WrestlingInc.com. Nick, and the reason you are joining me today is because we're talking about a subject that I think has come up a lot on this pod, and it's certainly something that I've talked about on other podcasts like WrestleNomics, and I've written about before. And that is these AEW media scrums and kind of how they've evolved over time and how things have taken place involving the media scrums and the kind of attention that they've gotten and how the talent have reacted during them. And there's really nobody better to ask about this than you, Nick, because I'm gonna wager that have you been to more of these than anyone else? Have you missed one yet?
No, I've been to every AEW and Ring of Honor media scrum, and I've attended more media scrums than the AEW PR rep, Mandy O'Donnell. She missed one because she was sick. So I've lapped even their internal people.
So just you and Tony Khan, I'm assuming.
I guess. Oh man, wow, yeah, just me and TK.
So the first one, if I recall correctly, was that like pep rally in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I
You went
guess
to that. You
yes,
attended that, didn't you?
I did. I think it was it called a pep rally? Maybe called
I
a pep.
called it a pep rally because it was in like the Jaguars parking lot and they had like the cheerleaders and the mascot there. But it was
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's right. They didn't really do a media scrum. There was just like informal questions you could kind of ask at the end. I remember because I physically like grabbed Tony Khan and like pulled him in and had my camera like right here. And I was the one to ask him about insurance, medical insurance for wrestlers.
right. Because if I recall correctly, the scrums now, if you go to them or you see them, they're they're pretty formalized now. Everyone has a seat. There's people handing out the microphones. There's a table with the microphones and everything like that. If I recall correctly, the early stages, it was kind of like a more like almost like what you would see like in a locker room after a sporting event, like Tony with his back to the wall and a bunch of reporters sticking their recorders or whatever in his face. That's right. That's how it first kind of started, correct?
Yeah, it got it. It was. It took a while to kind of get to where we are now with the media scrums. It was pretty wild west for a while. We didn't even have chairs for a long time. We just all stand for hours on end. It was awful.
Yeah, and it was very like it gave off the impression of everyone was being confrontational, right? Like Tony literally has his back to the wall and everyone's holding up their microphones and they're like, oh, asking various questions. But I guess for you now, when you first started like in wrestling media, did you think that you would be attending like media scrums like this and doing like kind of a press conference, circuit? It's very different than I feel like what a lot of wrestling media people would have experience with in their past. A lot of it is interviewing people one-on-one in a podcast form or communicating through people for stories for that you're writing. But this is a very different, like live and in person, like kind of controlled media setting to an extent. How did you kind of like learn and adapt to to that kind of presentation?
Yeah, I think the only thing that came close to the media scrums before AEW started doing them was Triple H used to do the NXT media calls. I think before the show, I think going into it, we do like a media call with Hunter. By the way, I hope he brings us back. Um, and that's kind of what got me. That's kind of where I started to feel my footing on this. I was actually Justin LaBar who gave me the advice a long time ago. He's like, "You're gonna ask whatever questions you want to ask, and they're gonna give whatever answers they want to give." And so the thing for me was kind of finding that line or tone where you could ask questions that you knew you would get real answers to. Like that's like it's so easy to just get on there and go, "Oh, you're great. What do you think is going to happen at the pay-per-view?" And then you pat yourself on the back and say, "I talked to Triple H today." Um, that's where I kind of started to get that. And once we got into the AEW media scrums, I actually never really had to adapt. I mean, if anything, it's kind of an environment built for a guy like me. I'm very loud. I'm very upfront. I like being first. I like all of that. And so even from the even from the Jacksonville rally, like I said, I was the first one to physically grab Tony, pull him to the side, and ask him a very hard question. And regardless if I'm sitting or I'm standing or whatever it may be, I always just kind of kept I've always tried to keep that kind of energy. I over time, I think I've gotten better with the tone, where I can ask questions that maybe other people wouldn't, and I ask them in a way where it doesn't sound kind of confrontational, or like maybe you're crossing a line or something like that. I think tone is probably more something I've adapted to. I don't really know that my line of questioning has changed too much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a key balance that I think a lot of people are going to work to find when they're interviewing people. And it's harder in a press conference setting, right? If you're interviewing someone for a long period of time, which both me and you do all the time for our jobs,
Sure.
you can work in harder, maybe more challenging questions, or questions on more sensitive topics as you're building a rapport with them, kind of as you're going on an interview, as opposed to the press conference where you might only get one or two questions and you really want to make those count. Um, what do you think about how that kind of relationship, and like you said, asking questions on maybe sensitive topics, asking them questions that maybe the person who you're asking them doesn't feel super comfortable wanting to answer them truthfully? Because we get that. I think there's a lot of criticism out there about some of the questions that are asked in these media scrums, and that there have been people in wrestling media who have said that they don't want to ask difficult questions because they're afraid that their credentials are going to be pulled, or that they're going to, they might be reliant on getting talent booked for their shows, and that they don't want to jeopardize that. How do you kind of ask difficult questions? Like you said, you ask difficult questions. And I'm not saying that because, I'm friendly with you and I've worked with you before. I honestly think that you ask some of the better questions at those media scrums, yet you've gone to every single one of them. You haven't made anyone upset enough to lose, that access before. What kind of advice would you, I guess, you give to people, or kind of say to people who are maybe more worried that they're are afraid to kind of push the people they're interviewing that maybe hold that kind of access over them?
Well, um, it's a good question. I would say don't be scared. And look, there's nothing. A lot of the stuff I'm asking about that's hard questions is not like stuff that's not already out there. I'm following up on stories that are already out in the ether. There's nothing. It's not like I'm creating something and being like, hey, Phil, I heard Scott doesn't like you. Or is that the reason you guys are, on different brands? Like that's that. Then you're a dick, right? But if you're like, hey, there's this report out there, I was wondering if you would comment on it. You can kind of tee stuff up, because sometimes these guys want to comment on it. Obviously, Punk, I think, would have loved to have commented on this earlier. And the other thing to keep in mind too is that you're there to create news. You are there to create content that people want to engage and people want to share around. And that is why you are there. If you are there and you are not creating content that people care about, you should not be there. you should go watch it on your couch. If you're just there for some clout and to say you were there, great. But like that's not why I'm there. And you shouldn't be afraid to be there and do your job. Tony Khan opened up the door to us to be allowed to do this. He comes from a legitimate sports background. He wants that kind of vibe. He wants that kind of flavor. It is a little difficult in pro wrestling because, yeah, you don't want to, I will directly with Tony get into the weeds with booking stuff, but like there was that incident with Swerve in Our Glory from this last one where somebody asked him how they felt about how the booking, or there should have been an audible and the Acclaim should have won, and then Tony was like freaking out, and then I followed up and I was like, how do you guys feel about the fact people thought you should lose tonight? And that's, again, kind of a way to kind of soften it to talent. But even then, I don't really like to soften stuff. I felt in that instance I had to, because I thought they were all about to lose their minds, but that was the story of the match. What else am I supposed to? I'm supposed to find something else to talk
It's
about?
what everyone was saying online. If you go on social media, everyone would ask that question. And I don't have a problem with the talent kind of being like, fuck that. Look, we're not going to call an audible. I think I should be the champion just because this team got over in the match. That's us doing our job. So I didn't have a problem with them maybe being a little, snippy about it. I think it created good content. And like you said, people that are there, I think this is something I feel like I learned when I went to the Ring of Honor press conference for Death Before Dishonor. People are there from different outlets, and those outlets have different goals for the kind of content that they're trying to generate from these media conferences. I kind of get frustrated with some of like the kayfabe based questions, where people will ask like, who do you want to defend the title against next? But I also have to understand some people are looking for that for whatever their outlet is. They want to be able to put on their outlet that, Claudio Castagnoli wants to wrestle, Dustin Rhodes or whoever for the Ring of Honor title. That's what they're looking for. I was there for WrestleNomics. It's a very like kind of like serious, more highbrow kind of niche podcast, I'm going to ask maybe more serious questions about business or things like that, as opposed to some other outlets. And I think that's something that might be difficult for maybe the person who's just watching the presser to kind of understand that different media have different goals, and we're all kind of in this room trying to service who we think our audiences are.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And look, I'm not here to judge how anybody else does their job. I know that certain people show up and, you're at a film website, and who do you want you to play in a movie, right? That's a question I heard recently from a film outlet, and I was like, for them, that works. I wouldn't ask that, but I get it, What bugs me, though, is when people just show up and obviously just have no agenda other than just meeting and talking to a famous person. That kind of, and you can kind of tell. And it also, by the way, for what it's worth, bugs me when people show up in like dirty t-shirts and do not take themselves seriously. It's really hard for people to take pro wrestling journalists seriously as it is. Presenting yourself that way doesn't make it any easier for all of us. So
yeah, I mean, that's just something that I felt the same way, in the sense that there's a level of kind of, you're trying to give off a message of professionalism. And I am not a fashionista. I'm not someone out there in like a fine Armani suit, but I think if you're being asked to cover something professionally, you should try to dress at least a little bit professionally. I also like like when people clap and applaud certain things. I get why people want to do that, and there's sometimes a level of like social pressure to do that. But I was always taught as a journalist when you're covering live events that you're supposed to be kind of like a fly on the wall. You're not supposed to be a participant.
Yeah, it even when I'm watching the shows, I try to present myself. I don't know that I've ever applauded in a scrum. Maybe if like I think maybe I don't know if Okada was there or something, and it was like, oh, thank you for coming. That was pretty cool. Thank you. But no, I don't know that I've ever like cheered or applauded in a scrum. But when I was watching, I watched Bloodsport back in New Orleans. I don't know, 2019 at this point. It's right just before Moxley had joined AEW, so maybe 2018. Yeah, wow.
2019 would be right, that because Bloodsport would have been during WrestleMania, so it would have been like April 2019.
Yeah,
Moxley left a few months later.
I was right the first time, but I went to Bloodsport and I wound up in the balcony standing next to John and William Regal, watching Bloodsport, and I loved the way Regal watched the matches. And then at the end of the match, if he liked the match, he'd give it a slight applause. And I asked people like why he was doing that, and they said it's how he was brought up to do it. He was brought up to watch and observe a match and then rewarded at the end, and not to behave like a fan. And it was very, I kind of loved it, and so like when you go to watch me at a show, more often than not, I'll be the guy kind of sitting there watching, everybody's going nuts. At the end of the match, I'll just kind of give it one of these if it's good. But even that, I feel like it projects this image of professionalism, of control, right? You're not acting like a fan. You're not presenting yourself like a fan, presentation is big for me. It's very, very big for me. Perception is reality.
Yeah, and I get the sense sometimes during the pressers that people, I think part of this is people like to share their opinion, and a part of it is also they're trying to be friendly with the talent that they're interviewing. There's a lot of like questions that are prefaced by compliments, like, oh my God, I thought that was a great match. I thought that was the match of the night. What do you think about this? And I always thought that was a little bit strange when people kind of butter up I understand the logic behind it, but I always thought that was kind of strange when people like, okay, you don't have to give this person a compliment before you ask them a question. And it could be a really good question, but I think sometimes people feel more comfortable in that situation by asking them, kind of like trying to get on a more friendly basis with them, which is hard to do, like I said, in a presser.
Yes, it is. It is totally them just trying to be friendly, or they don't know what to ask, right? Like a lot of people who haven't done this, a ton of times, or it's their first time, or they're in there, it's like deer in headlights. I don't know what to do. I swear I went to an FTR media scrum recently where pretty much every question was some variation of, how does it feel to be the best tag team in the world?
I think that was the Ring of Honor press scrum.
Was that
it was like, what do you think? You guys are like top 5 tag team of all time?
Yeah. Oh, how does it feel to be so good? Like I get it, but
and those guys don't really want to answer that. Like, how much can they answer? How many times can they answer that question?
And it gets hard too, because like not everyone has like a kind of story you can kind of dig into. Like in that particular example, I remember I busted it up because I asked Dax about the injuries he suffered during the match, or appeared to suffer during the match, and that was actually like some kind of news insight. I have the kind of list in my head of things I know that are always interesting. Injury updates are always good. Contract updates are always good. But then I don't think I've asked Claudio Castagnoli a good question yet. I really don't. Every time he sits down, I'm like, because again, you don't want to go too off the rails, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I'd love to ask Claudio, how'd you feel about your former boss, Vince McMahon, stepping down amid various sexual assaults and harassment allegations? But this doesn't, that's going to get you heat because it's not the reason you're there. And you got to find a way to tie in what you want with the event that you're at, or you may not get asked back. If you just show up and just start asking questions that have nothing to do with why you're there, then you will risk getting asked to not come back.
And then you also, like, if you had 30, I always say this, like, if I ever met a wrestler, like if I bumped into them in real life, I would have like nothing to say to them. I would have nothing to say to them. Now, if I had someone on my show and I was interviewing them for like 30 minutes, I would have a ton of things to say to them. And it's kind of a hard in a presser just to come up with one question that someone can answer in a press conference setting without really having a real back and forth conversation with someone. And not, like you said, not everyone is you're not always going to have like an instant great question to ask somebody. And they kind of just sit down in front of you in whatever order the company decides to present them. And you just you feel like, oh, I don't really have anything. I'm not going to really submit a question.
Yeah. And, and it is. Sometimes you'll have that great question. Somebody will get it ahead of you. A lot of times, if I don't feel like the question was answered, I'll do follow-ups, which is, again, back to what kind of happened with Swerve. But most of the time these days, I feel like I've been pretty good about kind of nailing the question I want to come in with, whether it's because other people don't think of it or whatever it may be. The whole Colt Cabana CM Punk situation, like, that elevated due to stories that were surface level. The Adam Page, Hangman Page promo. Ask Punk about that at the Double or Nothing Scrums. That kind of got the ball rolling, right? Then we get to ROH, whatever the last one was, not Supercard. Final Battle? Death Before Dishonor.
Death Before Dishonor.
Yeah. And what's an ROH question? Hey, Cabana's, that Fightful report about Cabana and Punk, that falls in that vertical. That's fair game. That's ROH news. That's a report out there. And again, obviously now everybody knows I don't have any kind of agenda when I'm asking these questions. It's solely just like, this is the biggest story in this vertical. I would be a fool to talk about anything else, right? And it built, and we got what we got, at All Out, with Punk kind of finally putting his comment on it. And that was nothing more than just me kind of knowing there was something there and just bringing up surface level reports until somebody said something,
Now, so to take you to go back to Sunday, or I guess early Monday morning.
Sure.
So I'm sitting at home. I'm watching the YouTube AEW channel YouTube feed, waiting for the presser to start. And it starts late. Like, it starts and Punk is already talking and he's already mad. And I hear him talking about you. And I'm like, oh my God. And so what transpires. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe what I'm watching. Like, is anyone else awake? Like, is anyone else seeing this that I'm watching? And I assumed that you had asked him a question beforehand, because why else would he be talking to you? And it wasn't until afterwards, and someone said, look at the Fightful stream, because they were up a little bit earlier than the AEW stream was, that it was just totally unsolicited. That I think, you got the microphone first, right?
All I said is, I'm Nick Hausman with wrestling.
So you were going to ask a question, but he saw.
I was going to ask him about MJF, which I eventually did, but that was, whatever.
And then, but he saw your face and he said that was enough to set him off. And I'm sure you're not the instigator, in the sense that he really wanted to talk about that.
Well, here's what I think. And this is my theory of the case. And, I have not gotten into this with Punk since it, but, just kind of reliving everything and looking at how it all played out. It was very obvious that Punk wanted to put the heat on me and the media for,
Sure.
for in his mind, having skewed sources and agendas and trying to make his life hell, right?
Mm-hmm.
When that blew up, you got to go somewhere, right? And if you can't pin the heat on the media. Maybe you don't have a backup plan, and you just want to get stuff off your chest. I genuinely feel if I'd have said, yes, I am very good friends with Scott Colton, and Punk would have gone, see, that's why these stories are out there, because of people like Nick Hausman and his improv buddies, right? And it would have kind of diffused the story, and he wouldn't have really even had to comment on it. He was just gonna kind of bury it all and just be like, you guys are full of it. But since he couldn't do that, gotta put the heat somewhere, Jesse. And
he's looking for Brian in the back, and he's looking at Dave, and he's, I said this when it happened, and I thought he was just really unprofessional, and I thought he was trying. I got the sense, at least watching him, that he was trying to kind of intimidate people that were there, and just was up there. And it's tough because the general public is more likely to believe CM Punk big star than any individual media member. So everyone in the media can say that's not true. Young Bucks didn't tell us about, that Punk got Colt fired or was going to get Colt fired or anything like that. But most people are still going to believe CM Punk because he's a big star. And it's important for, I think, the media to show a little bit of solidarity in saying that, like, at least in my view, that it's not okay to get up on your pulpit and scream and say everyone is telling lies about me and everyone's doing a terrible job and everyone needs to disclose who their friends are, because that's what real journalists do. And just, I found it totally unprofessional. And I can be hard on the wrestling media sometimes, coming from a newspaper background, but I thought that this was really uncomfortable for members of the media, and I didn't appreciate his attacks on it.
Yeah, but it blew up in his face, Jesse.
Yeah.
At the end of the day,
yeah.
At the end of the day, we look way better, right? Like, at the end of the day, I would hope pro wrestlers think twice before drawing their own conclusions about the press and lay off, because it's become open season on us. People rag on pro wrestling press even when we're right. You framed it wrong or whatever.
It's all media, Nick. It's not just the pro wrestling media, but
whatever, and it blew up in his face. Look, I personally, none of these guys intimidate me. What are they gonna do? Hit me? They go hit each other in the back. Whatever.
I was say, maybe CM Punk would
go hit each other in the back. But what? Will Ospreay's like? Remember what? I don't know. Were you at Forbidden Door when Ospreay came in?
No.
Acting all? Oh man, dude, that guy came in full of piss and vinegar, throwing the belt around, yelling. Everybody's sitting there. And I'm like, this guy's hilarious.
Well, the New Japan guys are working a lot more than I think, and I don't think Punk was working at all. But you saw, like, Jay White at Forbidden Door was just like, he was clearly working. And and those guys.
Jay White, not Ospreay. Yeah, Jay White. Yeah.
Yeah, you're talking about Jay White, not Will Ospreay, right?
Yeah. I'm talking about Jay. Yes.
Yeah, and Jay, like, in New Japan, they have fake press conferences after every major show, and these guys answer fake questions from fake reporters, literally. So they're going to have a different perspective on the media conferences. I wanted to get to, because I want to be careful of your time here.
Yeah, sure.
I wanted to get to, so WWE had a very similar kind of media conference at the Clash of the Castle. I didn't really hear anything about this until it was happening, when people started talking about it after the pay-per-view ended. Triple H had a very similar kind of style media press call or presser that AEW has. It was after the show. He had a couple of, the big stars who were on the show come up and do things with it. Did you get a chance to see that? What did you think about that?
Dude, I've been flying by the seat of my pants. No, I've heard about it. I want to watch it. I have actually not been able to, or not that I haven't been able to. I haven't reached out to WWE to find out if that's going to be like a normal.
I'm very curious
thing?
If it's going to be, or if it was just something special for the UK media.
I think they're playing with stuff. I think that Hunter wants to be more open. Obviously, I mean, it's not like, any secret. He was always more open, right? He was doing the media calls, and I did a one-on-one with him in Chicago one time. It was awesome. So he's going to be more open. I would think they're trying it out. I think there's definitely a possibility for that to be happening. And they did it at Mania too. They did the post Cody Rhodes return media scrum.
That's true.
In Dallas, and I really would like to know how much influence Cody has backstage and what he is telling, because he's not wrestling obviously right now, but is he telling them like, hey, this is what worked for All Elite, this is what made us cool, this is, maybe try this, I know that there's some success here, because it does feel like a little bit of the Cody influence going on with the way they engage the press.
Yeah, I did watch the presser in the for the Clash of the Castle. It was very short. It was under 30 minutes, I believe. There was a lot of people there, but only a few people got to ask questions, and none of the questions were particularly interesting. Most of them were kind of like, the atmosphere was great. What was it like for the atmosphere? And someone wearing WWE hat and a WWE shirt stood up and asked, when can we expect to see Bad Bunny? Which felt like a planted question, but I'd be very interested to see if they do take that kind of thing to America, because and with notice, like if you do that after, I guess Survivor Series would be the next major pay-per-view, but even if you do it against your next pay-per-view show, will we see, you and Sean and whoever is normally at these pressers asking Triple H questions in the same way you guys asked Tony Khan questions? And
we were all at the Cody one, and it was very similar. So I think there's a possibility. I don't know about a Survivor Series, because Survivor Series is, spoiler alert, Thanksgiving weekend. That I did inquire with WWE about. I was like, hey, are you going to do a press row on Friday morning? Because I really don't want to eat my Thanksgiving dinner and then immediately fly out of town. And they were like, we don't know yet. So we'll see about Survivor Series.
Yeah, and that would be the big question. And how does that change? Like I said, Triple H is definitely more media friendly than Vince was. Like that's an extremely low bar to clear. How will he, I guess, react to maybe a stronger pushback from the media, which will happen over time? I think similar to how these AEW press conferences, I think, have evolved to a more serious setting. And go ahead.
So I think Hunter will be fine. Hunter's like very, very savvy.
Yeah, no, he's very good at answering harder. I mean, I don't say harder questions because he's rarely asked them, to be honest, but he's very good at giving out the speech that WWE wants them to speak.
Well, and I, again, not to blow too much smoke up my own butt here, but like, and there were other questions I know that people brought up I could have asked it, but I did ask Hunter. I was the first one to ask him how WWE creative was going to change under his control during SummerSlam weekend, and he was like, "You're gonna have to watch TV." And then I yelled at him, "That's a bad answer." And he goes, "What? I answered your question." I go, "No, that's not the answer I wanted." And then he gave a real answer, right? Yeah. And it wasn't the farm, but it was more insight than he'd given to anybody else. And sometimes it just takes a little prodding. I don't know why people don't. I don't know why people don't. It's hard on calls, I know, because they you ask your question and they drop you. But if you're there in person, this is your moment here. You get what you got to get. Don't let them off the hook. I feel like that happens all the time.
Right, and that cuts back me to like the AEW pressers, and I thought the press conference from like an overall media standpoint on after All Out was probably the best one I have seen as far as the quality of the questions, and also people asking follow-up questions, people not letting, whether it's Tony or anyone else, kind of get away with non-answers. There was repeated questions about, his concerns with WWE and his concerns with potential tampering and things like that, because he kind of dodged it. And I think that's ultimately a strength of the wrestling media, and one of the things that needs to continue to happen. And one of the reasons you need people with maybe more of a professional approach asking the questions is the ability to follow up on non-answers and things like that. I thought that has improved a lot since the start of the AEW pressers. And I wonder if that will continue in a WWE is really interesting because WWE is very closed to media historically.
Well, it's not always been that way. The only reason that WWEF became so closed to the media is because they launched their own magazine. Isn't that weird? Like, Vince was totally cool working with the press until he wanted to make his own magazine. And then all of a sudden, it was impossible to get interviews with wrestlers and get photos because he wanted that content for himself. It's weird. It's very weird. Well,
I would say Vince has never been good with the media in his career, and you can go back and find like the real sports things. But
he embraced it earlier. When he was on the up, Once he got on top, he didn't want people talking to
I
him.
think post steroid trial and things like that, once some scandals emerged, that he became much more suspicious of the media, which happens a lot when people become more powerful. But it'll be interesting with Triple H, who's always been more media friendly, right? The NXT media calls have started. I think he
Right.
wants to present a more, I think he's very big on, I think, presenting on the image of a company that wants to service wrestling fans. And I don't know, I think Vince believed that in his mind, that that's what he was doing, but was maybe less aware of how to appropriately do that. I think Triple H is more on the ball in that end and can relate more to, I think, the typical wrestling fan of today than Vince could. And I think part of that is being very active on social media and getting your name out there and getting fans to talk about you and things like that. I mean, I think that's the big secret to the company's success over the last few months, is the optics of the company being better and the company improving in a way that didn't exist under Vince.
Yeah, no, Vince had certainly got set in his ways, and I think it was Meltzer who said that he'd become his own hindrance to his own product. The business had plateaued under Vince's leadership. Hunter's trying some stuff out. Let's see if we can't bring some fans back. I think it does nothing but good to engage the press and get asked those hard questions and address them. Get out in front of them. Like, don't run and hide from this stuff, because if you're not going to address it, it's just going to get worse. And that's kind of the point Punk was making, right? Was that you didn't do a good enough job killing this story, and it's continued to be a thorn in my side, and it has continued to affect the way that I am perceived, and it has continued to affect his perceived drawing power. And so if you guys aren't going to get ahead of this and talk about it, I'm going to have to do it on my own. And that's what we got. And again, you're not doing something bad asking people about hard questions. They're going to address it one way or another, whether it's you, whether they have to comment on Twitter. Very rarely do any of these big stories go without ever being commented on. I mean, look at the Helwani sit down Hunter just did. That was one of the best bits of business they've done in a while. Covered everything everybody wanted to hear about. And now everybody's moving on,
I didn't like the Helwani interview.
You didn't like the Helwani interview?
I talked about it on WrestleNomics a lot.
What did you not like about the Helwani
because I
interview?
thought that was a soft corporate partner interview, and it didn't explore the real aspects of what people want to know. Like, Helwani asks how the product is going to be different. Triple H tells you the product's going to be different. I want to do certain things that Vince didn't want to do, but then doesn't get into any of the actual specifics, or what are some things that Vince didn't want to do that you want to do. It's all very.
That's a great point. He probably could have dug into it there.
It's all, and that's how I found a lot of Triple H's media. Not that he's unfriendly or antagonistic, but he's been very protective of both Vince's legacy while also trying to promote that he's going to do things differently, because he is. And I would appreciate it if he said something like, yeah, you know what, we're going to use the term wrestling. Vince didn't really like doing that, and I understand why, but I think we can say it, and I think we're going to embrace it because we think our fan base is ready to hear those words, and things like just small things like that I'd like to see. But
yeah, I agree with you. You can always get more into the details. I would have pushed him, maybe not why maybe that's why they didn't call me to do it.
That's why you're not working for BT Sport.
But I like that they were talking AEW stuff. You called NXT a developmental brand. Like,
he admitted that they lost, which is what I was surprised by. That's a very un-Vince move, is to admit that they lost, even if he is backtracking on that NXT is developmental. It doesn't really count. At least he admitted that they lost. That was almost the most interesting bit to me.
Yeah, but like, dude, I mean, some people be terrified to even bring up Vince to Hunter, or AEW for that matter. I didn't think it was like, a Bob Costas style or Bryant Gumbel style sit down, hard hitting expose. But I did think that it was better. It was a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, almost anything is better than Vince, who really lived in like this shadowy background where we're relying on like, second, third, fourth hand reports for what his thinking was. He gave the McAfee interview, which I didn't find. I know some people really liked it. I didn't find it particularly.
I thought it was okay. I thought the only thing I really liked about the McAfee one is I liked listening to him talk about how he grew up in a trailer park, because he never really talks about his childhood.
Yeah. But it was more like look at how wacky and zany Vince is, as opposed to like, I think, real insight into his mind and his booking patterns. But
yeah,
That's going to be it for today. I appreciate Nick for stopping by on relatively short notice. He's making the media rounds. Nick, what do you want to plug?
First of all, Jesse, this is the end of my media rounds. You're the last one. And I want to thank you for having me on, Jesse. Jesse is a great guy and wonderful journalist, and support Jesse and support what's the name of it? It's
Gentlemen's Wrestling Podcast.
Gentlemen's Wrestling. Support that. I just say you're with WrestleNomics anymore, but I know that
yeah, that's fine.
That's not the case always. Whatever. But yeah, I'm over at Wrestling Inc. Support Wrestling Inc. If you like the work that I do, I don't get to do that without Wrestling Inc. So keep Wrestling Inc. alive. Go there, visit the site, click on something, read something, leave a comment, whatever you want to do. And if you want to support me personally, I'm over on Twitter. I'm at Nick_Hausman. I don't tweet a lot about wrestling. It's mostly photos of my dog, but you're welcome to find me there. And my DMs are always open. So if you have a question or comment or need advice, just somebody to talk to, you're always welcome to reach out to me as well.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Nick. I appreciate you coming on as a guest. We'll see everyone again in the future.